President's made it clear that he hopes, in weeks, not months, to be able to open up the country. But let me make one last encouragement to every American. We will get to that day quicker if every American will put into practice the President's coronavirus guidelines for our nation.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press. And this is Ground Game. We're about halfway through a 15-day order that has ground much of the United States to a halt. And it's unclear what happens next as President Donald Trump and political leaders across the country grapple with how to contain the fast-moving coronavirus. Meanwhile, Congress strains to push nearly $2 trillion into the economy to keep major industries and individual Americans afloat. We hope most of you are safely social distancing. And for those of you who have jobs that require you to be out at work, thanks for all you're doing for the rest of us. There is so much to discuss in national politics this week, so let's jump right in. Here are my 3 big questions to watch. First, is President Donald Trump really about to order the U.S. economy to reopen amid a pandemic? And how much of that has to do with his reelection? Second, what exactly is in that $2 trillion package that the Senate has been wrestling over? And why has it been so hard to pass? And the third big question in politics right now, how does Joe Biden break through in this extraordinary moment? So much of the focus, of course, is on the president. He's the leader of the country, and he's seeking a second term in office. And we've seen this really interesting shift in the president's rhetoric over the last couple of days. For the last week or so, he had been really on board with public health officials who were saying we needed at least 15 days to essentially shut down the U.S. economy, close schools, keep businesses shuttered in order to contain the spread of the new coronavirus. But the president talked to a lot of people over the weekend. He talked to political allies. He talked to economists. He talked to Wall Street leaders. And he showed up back to work at the White House on Monday, starting to signal that he thought the economy should start to rev up. And what does that mean? That means people have to go back to work. And there's a reason that the president is starting to say this. He is really worried about what the economy will look like in November when he's facing voters as he asks for a second term. So now he's suddenly thinking, maybe instead of shutting down the economy to control the virus, we actually need to let the economy grow again. And this is a risky position. He is essentially defying public health officials, the same advisors that you see up there talking next to him during these daily White House briefings, who say that the only way to stop the spread of coronavirus, the only way to get this under control is to keep people at home. They really do not want to see Americans, especially in major cities with high density, riding subways, riding buses, walking down crowded streets. They say that is exactly the way that this will spread even further. So the next couple of days are going to be really crucial. How does the president weigh his desire to see the stock market growing again, to see GDP on the rise, to see unemployment going down, with the advice of people who say that that will only spread coronavirus further? This, again, is a public health challenge for the president, a leadership challenge, but it's also a political challenge. On the one hand, he believes that a stronger economy will put him in better position to win re-election. On the other hand, if he decides that he is going to prioritize the economy over Americans' lives, and the consequences of that are really negative, and a lot of Americans get sick, and unfortunately a lot of Americans would die potentially in that situation, that could obviously reflect very negatively against him as well. So I would watch for that dynamic over the next couple of days. As the president has been talking about the prospect of opening up the economy, the Senate is rushing to try to push $2 trillion through, a big package that would try to essentially rescue and shore up the economy.
We'll be helping Boeing, we'll be helping the airlines, we'll be helping the cruise lines, we'll be doing a lot of things, and the money will all come back to us, and it'll come back to us in a very strong form.
So the second question that I know is on the minds of a lot of people is, what exactly is in that package, and why does it seem to be so hard for the Senate to get this done? So there are a couple of things that are happening here. Senators know that this is an economy that, even if it does open up in the next couple of weeks, will have taken a big hit. And the only real way to try to shore it up is with a big influx of government and taxpayer money. And they're trying to do 2 things. They're trying to help prop up some industries that have already taken a big hit. Top of the list, the airlines. You've all seen those pictures of nearly empty flights traveling around the country and canceled flights in a lot of other places. The airlines need tens of billions of dollars to try to get through this moment. On the other hand, there's a lot of concern about individual Americans, people who are being laid off or furloughed from their jobs, people whose hours are being cut, small business owners who don't know how they're going to make payroll or how they're going to keep their stores or businesses open. So there's a lot of discussion about trying to cut checks to Americans. But there are two concerns here. On the one hand, on the side of industry, you have Democrats in particular that are pushing for stringent conditions on this money. They want to know that the government can't just give tens of billions of dollars to an industry and then see that money go to executives' bonuses or stock buybacks. And a lot of this is the lessons of the 2008 financial industry bailout that are really coming into play here. If you remember that time when the economy was tumbling toward recession, the government gave billions of dollars to the banks, and politicians in both parties feel really burned by what happened there. And they're trying to avoid the same outcome here. On the other side of this spectrum, on what happens to individual Americans, Democrats have really been pushing for more money into the pockets of people, particularly who are going to be on unemployment. They want to ensure that this is a package that will help shore up those Americans, not just for 2 months, but for 4 months, really. And that gives you a sense of how long this crisis could really continue. In the backdrop of all of this, Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee.
For too long, the warning signs were ignored. For too long, the administration said the threats were, quote, under control, quote, contained, quote, like the flu. The president says no one saw this coming. Well, that's just not accurate.
My third question today, how does Biden break through in this really extraordinary moment? We talked in our last episode about how this should be a moment for Biden to be excited, for him to be traveling the country, really trying to energize voters. Not only can he not do that, he's having trouble just getting through this crazy news cycle. How does he try to draw attention? Well, his team is coming up with a couple of ways to try to make that happen. They have constructed a TV studio in his house in Delaware where he is holed up, working from home as well. And they're just trying to have him out there more often. He's started to do a lot of interviews on cable news, not something that Joe Biden likes to do on a regular basis. He is starting to have daily virtual briefings where he's trying to essentially compete with what Donald Trump is doing at the White House. But this is really difficult for Biden. He is not in an elected office at this point. He has no real power right now. He's simply talking about the things that he would do if he were president in this moment. He's trying to give Americans an alternative vision, trying to imagine what it would be like if it was Joe Biden up at that White House podium instead of Donald Trump. I do think, though, that this is going to be a really tough effort for the former vice president. How does he try to cut through all of the very urgent news that we're seeing happen with the health situation across the country and, of course, competing with the big megaphone of Donald Trump at the White House? That's it for this episode of Ground Game. We'll be here every step of the way during this extraordinary moment in American politics, giving you all the news you need to know. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. This episode of Ground Game was recorded on Tuesday night. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com.
From the Westwood One Podcast Network.